Are you struggling to beat some of the more difficult encounters in Baldur's Gate 3? Or are you having problems to understanding the basics of combat in the game? Then don't worry, in this video I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the game's combat system. The rule set of Baldur's Gate 3 is based on the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, which is turn-based. In a nutshell, turn-based combat means that every character gets to take their turn and then a new round starts. For that to work, the order of who acts when needs to be decided on first. This is where initiative comes into play. At the beginning of a fight, every character involved rolls one 20-sided die, also referred to as 1d20. Anything else affecting your initiative, like a dexterity modifier, is then applied on top afterwards to determine your final score. The character with the highest score acts first, and then it goes down from there. You should be aware though that party members of yours that are next to one another in the initiative order can act in the same turn. This means that you can freely go back and forth between them and use whatever you want based on their remaining resources for that turn. The game also lets a range of smaller creatures act simultaneously in the same turn in order to speed up combat rather than having you wait for them to act one by one. The only real exception to the initiative order though is a mechanic called surprise. If you manage to sneak up on your enemies or if they somehow get the jump on you, the combat begins with a surprise round. Being surprised in Baldur's Gate 3 means that characters caught off guard are not allowed to act at all in that round. This is of course a quite powerful way to get a leg up in any encounter. After this surprise round, everything then follows the normal initiative order. Now, to be able to do anything in combat, you usually need to position yourself properly. As a melee character, you need to get up close, and as a ranged character, you want to make sure that nothing is blocking your shot. This is where movement comes into play. Every race has a trait called base racial speed, and that is what determines the default distance you can move per turn. Most races can move 9 meters per turn, but there are some exceptions, so make sure to check this out whenever you create a new character or invite a companion into your group. Base racial speed is only one factor though. On top of that, you have items, status effects, spells, and other actions that can affect your movement speed in both positive and negative ways. To give just a few examples here, grease is a status effect that among other things results in difficult terrain and halves the movement speed of characters. You basically lose 2 meters of movement distance for every meter you walk through grease. Dash on the other hand doubles your movement speed for that turn. This is an action available to every character you choose, but we will talk more about different types of actions later. You also have spells like Ensnaring Strike or Hold Person that can completely block any movement with varying other effects on top depending on the spell. Now this is just a small sample of conditional movement modifiers, but it should give you a sense of what type of things you can expect in the game. You can also find items that grant you either conditional or even permanent increases to your movement speed. There's one last movement mechanic that I want to give a bit more attention to before we move on, and that is jumping. Jump is a bonus action, and like dash you can use it on every one of your characters. We'll tackle the exact difference between an action like dash and a bonus action like jump in just a bit, so don't worry too much about that here. The important thing right now is that jump allows you to open up movement options you might otherwise not have had. Imagine you want to hit an enemy with a melee weapon, but an obstacle blocks your way. You can of course try to walk around the obstacle, but sometimes that means you don't reach the enemy before your max distance for that turn is covered. Using jump in that instance might allow you to take a shortcut and still have enough movement speed left to reach your target and bash their skull. Another situation where jump comes in handy is to reach the high ground. If you are positioned high enough compared to your enemy, you get a bonus during your attacks, and jump is one way to reach such a position. If you want to be particularly crafty, you can also carry around some boxes and drop them prior to a fight to set up an easy high ground for yourself. Last but not least, jump can also help you get out of difficult terrain like grease as mentioned earlier. Rather than walking through the grease at half speed, you can jump out first and reach the end of the greasy terrain with less movement speed wasted for that turn. When you use jump in any instance, your movement speed for that turn is reduced by 3 meters. And how far you can jump is affected by your strength's ability score. But enough about movement. Let's get into the real action and talk about, well, actions, bonus actions, and reactions. Reactions are situational, and they allow characters to react to certain events or triggers. They can be executed once per turn for every character. A common reaction is an opportunity attack. When an enemy standing next to a melee-focused character moves away in battle, it basically gives a free attack against the enemy during their turn. You can see a visual warning whenever this would happen to one of your characters, so that you can decide on whether or not it's worth the risk. The exact type of available reactions overall are based on your class and your items. Now, let's discuss how you actively can affect combat. During each turn of a fight, you have a limited amount of things you can do, and actions are one set of moves that you can perform. What actions you have available to you is based on your class, your items, and a list of general actions that are available to all characters. Let's look into a few examples of different types of actions. Remember when we used dash to double our movement speed? Well, this was an action already. It is one way we can spend the limited pool of actions we have in a single turn. Earlier we also talked about spells like Ensnaring Strike or Hold Person to affect the battlefield. This too was using up an action. Unless impaired somehow, you at least have one action per turn, but there are multiple ways to increase this both temporarily and permanently. For some classes like fighters, they only need to reach a certain level in order to get a permanent increase. One of the most common actions in battle is of course to attack your enemy. This usually is done with melee attacks, ranged attacks, or damage focused spells. Most of these will use up one action in your turn. We'll get into some of the exceptions when covering bonus actions in just a bit. In this situation here, I'm playing a barbarian, which tends to be a melee focused character. My first goal is to get close to my enemy, so I'm using my movement speed to get there. This does not cost me any actions yet. Now that I'm close to my target, I check my options and decide for a regular attack with my main weapon. As the tooltip says, this costs an action, and after hitting the enemy, I cannot activate any other actions anymore. Above my hotbar, you can also see that an action resource has been spent. The only resource symbol for actions I have is no longer lit up. Now you might notice that some of the things on my hotbar still are highlighted and usable. Well, these are bonus actions and they use up a different resource of their own. Bonus actions allow for a lot of useful utility throughout each turn. For example, you can activate certain class actions like Rage from the Barbarian. You can drink a health potion to heal some of the damage you've taken. Or you can use a weapon skill like Pommel Strike when wearing a greatsword in order to attack your enemy once more. Jump is a bonus action as well that we've covered already, but there are other quite useful ones available to every character. One of them is Dip, which allows you to dip a weapon into a surface and temporarily enhance it. For example, you can dip it into fire and get free fire damage on top when striking with that weapon. One of the most fun bonus actions in the game though is probably Shove. Shove basically allows you to push a target away. The stronger you are, the further you can shove someone. With all the height differences throughout the world, there is a lot of potential to use it effectively in combat. Or just to have some fun. When you try to shove someone, your athletics skill is tested against the opponent's athletics or acrobatics skill, whatever is higher. If you try to shove someone while hidden or invisible, then you get a bonus. You can also drop healing potions onto the ground and use Shove to push them next to your allies so that they only have to walk through the destroyed potion in order to get healed. You can always check what requires you to spend an action or bonus action by hovering over your options. The tooltips also grant additional information on top. And if you ever come across a term that is highlighted but you can't remember what it does, simply press T and the tooltip remains frozen for you to hover over that term. This is something you can do multiple times even in case that the new tooltip includes something you want to check out as well. Throughout a turn, you can mix and match both movement actions and bonus actions as you like. You don't have to fully exhaust one of them first. It is possible to move a bit, use an action, move a bit more, and so on. When you try to attack an enemy and hover over them, the game shows you a percentage. This explains to you how likely you are to actually hit your target. For every attack, the game makes an attack roll. It uses the result of a 1d20 roll and adds any modifiers like weapon enchantments, proficiency bonuses, or ability modifiers to determine your final score. If the result is equal or higher compared to your target's armor class, then you succeed with your attack. The same is true for a ranged attack using a bow for example, or when casting a spell like done here. But let's break down some of the earlier mentioned terms that are affecting your attack roll. Being proficient in something means your character is particularly good at it, which can be related to the use of items, skills, or spells. A proficiency modifier is then applied as a bonus. This modifier starts at +2 and increases as you level up. Armour Class is your defense against attacks, and it's influenced by items, spells, and feats you might have picked up as part of your class choice. The higher your Armour Class is, the less likely it will be for your enemies to hit you. Being proficient in wearing a particular type of armor negates any potential penalties it might have had otherwise. For example, if you wear heavy armor as a spellcaster without being proficient in heavy armor, then you cannot cast any spells at all. When it comes to determining the ability modifier used as a bonus in your attack rolls, spells use either intelligence, charisma, or wisdom. Ranged weapons use dexterity, and melee weapons usually use strength, unless they have the finesse tag, which means they might use dexterity. Whenever you roll a 20 during an attack roll, it is a critical hit. This means you succeed regardless of the armor class of your opponent. On top of that, your damage dice rolls are doubled before additional modifiers are applied. A weapon doing 2d6 normally would do 4d6 instead, and then everything else is added. If you roll a 1, this is a guaranteed miss. It doesn't matter how many beneficial modifiers you would have on top of that. While many attacks with spells follow the rules laid out so far, there are a few additional things to consider. For starters, a lot of spells require you to also spend a resource called spell slots. This is in addition to any action or bonus action resources involved. If you run out of spell slots, then you cannot cast certain spells anymore, even if your action and bonus actions are refreshed next turn. There are certain ways to refresh spells during combat or while exploring, but in general you usually have to rest to make sure that you can draw on the entire strength of your party during the next battle. Some spells do not follow the attack roll concept at all, even though they might aim to do damage to your enemies. This is often the case for area affecting spells, for example. In these instances, all enemies that were targeted execute something called a saving throw. Instead of you rolling an attack roll to determine if you succeed, the enemy rolls a saving throw to determine if they manage to defend against your spell. Like in many other cases, the game is very generous when it comes to giving you the right information. So when checking the tooltip of a particular spell, you can also see if it involves an attack roll or a saving throw by the enemy. And in case of a saving throw, it also says what ability is used for that. The last thing to note here is the concept of concentration. Some spells that are meant to last multiple turns only do so if the caster manages to keep focusing on them. In certain situations, like taking damage for example, a saving throw using the Constitution modifier is forced upon the caster. If they fail, the spell is cancelled immediately. The difficulty used for this saving throw is 10 or half of the damage taken, whatever is highest. Now you obviously want to maximize your chances for successful attack rolls as much as possible. This is where the concept of advantage comes into play. When you have advantage, the game rolls instead of 1d20, 2d20, and it keeps a high score. This is of course highly beneficial, and here are some common ways how you can get advantage. You attack an enemy who can't see you, either because they are blind, or because you attack out of hiding like I do here. If you attack a prone enemy lying on the ground with a melee attack, you also have advantage. The same is true if the enemy is paralyzed or otherwise rendered unable to move. And if you have the high ground against an enemy, you also benefit from the bonus of having advantage. As much as having advantage is desirable though, disadvantage is something you want to avoid whenever you can. In this case, you again roll with 2d20 instead of 1, but it is the lowest of the two rolls that gets chosen. Like advantage, there are a couple of ways to get disadvantage. Here are some of the examples. When an enemy is next to you, you have the status effect Threatens, which applies disadvantage to ranged attacks. If you've been blinded, or if you try to shoot at someone who's clouded in darkness, then you receive disadvantage on your attack roll as well. And the same is true if you're on the low ground aiming at someone higher up, or trying to shoot from a distance that exceeds your normal weapon range. There are a couple of other situations, so always be on the lookout for advantage or disadvantage tags when you hover over an enemy and assess the likelihood of your success. Quite often you might be able to choose a different action or target, or simply reposition yourself to turn the odds in your favor. Whenever you manage to actually hit an enemy, you want to see them take damage of course. The combat log at the bottom right shows you how the damage is calculated for every successful hit of yours. The general formula is a weapon damage roll first, and then you add additional modifiers like weapon enchantments, ability modifiers, and anything else like temporarily applied fire or poison. In my fight here for example, I hit the enemy with a greatsword that has a permanent fire effect. I rolled 6 for the main 2d6 weapon roll and did additional 3 damage because of my strength ability modifier. On top of that, it then added another 4 fire damage from the fire effect. Be aware that you always want to examine your enemies first, especially in difficult fights. When doing so, you can check for special buffs or skills, but even more so, you can also check what damage types might affect them differently than normal. There are a variety of damage types, including but not limited to slashing, piercing, fire, or cold. Whenever someone is vulnerable to a certain damage type, they take double damage. If they are resistant, they only take half. And if they are immune, they take no damage at all. So this is very important to check before deciding how to engage with a particular enemy. Should a character of yours go below 0 health points, they enter a dying state. In that state, they roll death saving throws every turn. Left alone in the dying state, they roll 1d20 each round. Between 1 and 10, it brings them closer to death. Between 11 and 20, it stabilizes them. After failing 3 times, they actually die and they need to be revived, for example with a scroll. If they succeed 3 times instead, they get back up with a limited health pool and rejoin the fight. Healing them or using the action help on a character standing next to the dying one also brings them back into the fight. In these cases, the dying character gets back up with a limited health pool but no actions until the next turn. Critical roles apply here as well and either help your dying character up faster or bring about their demise. This is it for today. If you made it this far, I really do hope that you feel a lot more prepared for your own battles in Baldur's Gate 3 and that the dying part in particular will be a lot less relevant for you. But don't hesitate to rewatch certain sections whenever you need a refresher. And make sure to subscribe to the channel to not miss out on future videos with more tips and tricks for the game. Thank you for watching, and see you on Baldur's Gate 3.